All right, so hi everyone, and thanks for joining us today for our presentation titled T for PNP and Me. My name is Andy. I use he, him pronouns. I am a queer trans man located on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat Petun First Nations, also known as Takaranto or Toronto.
And I'm Daniel. I also use he, him, his pronouns, and I am located on the stolen lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. So the criminalization of substance use has always fallen onto the backs of people of color in Canada, starting with alcohol prohibition under the Indian Act, which prevented Indigenous people from purchasing liquor, drinking in public, or even stepping foot into a bar. But I want to begin today by acknowledging the colonial histories of the land that I am specifically on, because they have shaped the way that we understand drugs and prohibition today. So the Opium Act of 1908 was preceded by race riots in Vancouver, led by the Asiatic Exclusion League in 1907, who targeted Asian laborers, destroying their property in Chinatown and raging a 3-day assault on Japanese Canadians in Japantown. The Opium Act was signed into law as a response to the riots by Mackenzie King as a means of creating racist fear around opium to target Chinese business owners and advocate for anti-immigration policies. To give you some context for who King is, at the time, King was the Deputy Minister of Labor, but he would later become the longest standing Prime Minister in Canadian history. He's also the man who called for Japanese internment and did not allow Japanese people to return to BC until 4 years after the war had ended. Anti-Chinese advocacy would later increase punishments and widen the number of substances criminalized, and there were several other attacks on Chinese business owners in Vancouver over the next 2 decades. Again, this was done as a springboard for anti-immigration advocacy, which included one of the famous five, Emily Murphy, who wrote in The Black Candle that these laws were specifically to protect the white race. So there is a strong belief that that criminalization is to protect our health and the general population, but in actuality, criminalization was a means of creating a white Canadian ethno-state. So today, I challenge our audience to question what they understand about substance use and where that knowledge comes from. How has racism and classism informed your beliefs? And what are you going to do to push back against this racist rhetoric?
Okay, thanks, Daniel, for the succinct overview of how and why drug prohibition came to be in Canada. Prohibition, the criminalization of drug use, is very much about perpetuating white supremacy and class divides. It is for pro-clutchers and people who are interested in maintaining the status quo. But the status quo that we are contending with today is an emergency. Our drugs are being poisoned, and thousands of people, loved, cared for, community members, friends, family, lovers, they are being poisoned and they are dying. So we need a lot of things to address that. We need decriminalization. We need safe supply, and we need better services for folks who need harm reduction services but are falling between the cracks of how we even conceptualize and delineate harm reduction supports and services. So what is harm reduction? I've just put a quick definition from the Canadian Mental Health Association up there. The emphasis is mine. I like this one because it mentions social harms. A lot of the times in public health, we get a bit stuck on reducing physical harms, and we don't pay enough mind to the social. And a lot of things about drug use are social. More on that in a second, but first let's talk about prevalence. We know that folks in our communities use drugs more. Here's just kind of a quick overview. And the data points aren't identical, but looking at some recent Canadian quantitative data, first from the Canadian Alcohol and Drug Survey 2019, which is a general population survey of alcohol and drug use among Canadians. This survey showed that the overall general Canadian population's past year methamphetamine or amphetamine use clocked in at about 0.5%. If we compare this to the results from CBRC's Sex Now survey from 2019, Sex Now, it's an annual survey of gay, bisexual, trans, and queer men, and two-spirit folks and non-binary people's health and wellness. So the Sex Now survey, focusing on our communities, that survey showed that the last 6 months use of methamphetamine, just methamphetamine, not including other forms of amphetamine, for respondents was 5.7%. Okay, 0.5% compared to 5.7% of queer and trans men and two-spirit and non-binary folks. That's a really big difference. So let's talk about some motivations then. Often when we think about motivations for drug use, we tend to kind of zero in on the difficult things, on the self-medication and the challenges in dealing with trauma. And of course, yes, absolutely, those things are there too. But when we started asking more questions about people's substance use by expanding the Sex Now survey in 2021 to capture a bit more of why people use substances, consistently the top three answers are to feel good or better about situations, to help with life difficulties, to connect with others. So these are social things, right? And we also talk more about, in this presentation, I've mentioned crystal methamphetamine. The reason for that is because we use particular drugs in particular ways. And one of the ways that we use particular drugs like crystal methamphetamine, like GHB, is in the context of party and play or sexualized drug use. So if we kind of circle back around and talk about who gets missed in conversations about drug use in the sector, which is to say in queer health, in aid service organizations, a lot of the time what we're really missing is trans perspectives. So we decided to invite trans voices into the room to do a community consultation and to develop a new resource that is about engaging in party and play by trans people for trans people. One of the perspectives that really comes up a lot that came out of disability justice movements, that is in harm reduction movements, is the idea that nothing about us without us. If resources are going to be for us, if they're going to be about trans people who use drugs, they need to be created by and for trans people who use drugs. And in this case, in the particular context of party and play. And it does focus more on the social practices which are relevant to harm reduction. It focuses on things like consent, desirability, navigating, having your body in a space that you might not have been to before or felt comfortable with before. It's about keeping safer, but with a broader focus. It's not just about gear, making sure your gear is new, that you're not sharing it. It's about, how to keep safe in new contexts, how to lean on your community, how to get support from others. And so that is an upcoming resource that we are putting out through the Community-Based Research Center.
Perfect. So in Vancouver, for folks who are looking for support, we have a couple programs for gay, bi, queer men and gender diverse folks, which includes all trans folks, including non-binary and two-spirit people. So the first program we have is P&Me, which is a 12-week group counseling program to help you identify and achieve goals related to P&P. So it's a harm reduction based program, so abstinence is not required. So your goals can include sobriety or reduced or safer use, or other health goals like coping with internalized shame or decreasing social isolation. We also support people through the after party, which is an informal social drop-in to connect with other people in the community, find support from peers, and just have fun with some of our weekly activities and guest speakers. Peers lead the programming at HIM, and we're always looking for more people to join us. And we certainly need more trans people in harm reduction and at HIM. So if you have an interest in community leadership, come talk to us. So more than anything, this presentation is intended to be an open dialogue and to continue this dialogue. So if you'd like to reach out to us, my contact info is daniel@checknot.ca. I also distribute harm reduction supplies like condoms and needles and pipes, and also hormone injection supplies through our website here at supplies.checknot.ca, or you can check out our PNP website link there.
And you can reach out to me at andy.lessard@cbrc.net. And we have a website that we've put together that focuses on party and play. Our T4PnP resource will be up there early April. So you can check that out there as well.